Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Pilgrims on the Digital Way. My name is Matt Poynton, aka Uncle Traveling Matt, and with me today, as always, is
I'm Mary Michelle. Hi, everyone.
and Mary Michelle. We did what did we do last week? We did. It was quite a good one, wasn't it?
Yes, we talked about planning your pilgrimage, Matt,
We did.
and what are the essentials.
We did. I
And
mean,
you had some very interesting things to say about that, as in
yeah. Don't
nothing is
overthink it.
essential. Just
Don't
go.
don't overthink it. Yeah, okay. Well, that seems to have been quite well received. What I want to do before we go on today's question, I actually wrote an essay. I've been writing a number of them
Okay.
on Medium, and one's about follow the path. So if you haven't checked that out, I'll put the link down below,
Yeah.
and then we can do that. But yeah, and that's that. But moving on, what's
Yeah.
the
Make sure you
question
get
for
that
today?
link in there, Matt.
I will.
Okay. So, do you want to hear the question for
Go on
today?
then.
Okay. So, the question is, can I plan my own pilgrimage?
Hmm. So you're saying,
So,
like, not doing a standard one, like, say, Camino
yeah, like I
Frances or
don't go on the Camino. I don't go on any of the established ones. I want to go to certain towns potentially. I'm interested in maybe a particular saint or more than one.
Mm-hmm.
I know some places that they went to,
Mm-hmm.
and I just make my own pilgrimage to go to those places that were sacred in the context of what I choose.
Okay. Okay. Well, I guess my opinion, my short answer is yes, of course you can. The question is, how do we do it? And
I
and
guess it's
and how?
kind of a funny question, Matt.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Are people, I guess there's more of this is more of a sideways question. Are people looking for other pilgrimages and other ways to, or does everybody still want to go on the Camino and
I guess the way I look at it is this. I think so. First of all, yes, you can. Of course, you can do it. It's very easy, but there are advantages and disadvantages to it, right? So I've planned a number over the years. So I'll tell you about a couple of them because I think they illustrate various points in different ways.
okay.
So the first one is I wrote a series of books about my local saints. So Saint Bertram, Saint Guthlac, Saint Editha, and a number of like Saxon saints in Mercia, which is the part of England I'm from. And at the end of each book, I said, if you want to go on a pilgrimage about this saint, here are the sites, and here's a route you can take. So
Okay.
that is good in that you've got these sites that are linked to the person and there is a suggested route,
Yeah.
right?
So you can do it.
Yeah, that's easy. The problem is like is that you don't get necessarily everything from it that you would get from an established pilgrimage route. First of all, I mean that these ones were
That's
very
interesting.
small, so they're not. I think I always try to involve walking. So, like the Saint Editha one, she was involved with Polesworth Abbey and Tamworth, where there's the only church dedicated to her, and they're about 8 miles. So what's that? About 12 kilometers apart. And so I did a walking pilgrimage between them. So it's a day one. But of course, the problem is it's not signposted,
Sure.
and there's no material to support you apart from the little book of her life that I gave, that I
Sure. You
wrote.
might be on a busy road or something like that.
Yes, yeah, and so if you're less confident, you don't have the signs to follow,
Right.
and you don't have there's not really a litany to follow. So I've always tried to include a prayer about that saint, but that's not the same as a whole litany. And you might say, well, does that really matter? But I would say it does, because one of the earliest pilgrimages I did was I went to a place called Glendalough in Ireland, And that's because I used to have this. Well, I used to have like TV with lots of channels. I don't really watch TV these days, but I did then. And there was this Catholic channel, and it used to have like this feature called Catholic Ireland, where it would talk about places in Ireland that were big with Catholics. And one of them was Glendalough, and I just thought, oh, that looks gorgeous. I've got to go there. So on my next visit to Ireland, I went there with my friend Brian, who lives in Dublin. It's in the Wicklow Hills, so it's an hour or so on the bus. It's not far. And we went, and it was really pretty. But unlike in other places where I've been, I just wandered around. There was no purpose. There was no liturgy to follow. There was no route. It was just, yeah, I visited this nice place, St. Kevin. I knew a little bit about him. I didn't know that much. And I felt it was a lovely day out, but I don't feel it was a very effective
Okay.
pilgrimage.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
It does. It makes absolute sense. It makes absolute sense.
So I think what I'm probably trying to say is if you want to plan your own pilgrimage, you might want to think it through a bit. So near me, we have the St. Bertram, and his shrine exists, and it's one of the few in Britain that survived the Reformation. And what like I did is there was a Christian retreat place near there, and I knew the people who ran it. And so I wrote a pilgrimage for them with like stations and meditations on his life. And we actually did it with a group, and it was really
Wow,
successful.
that's very cool.
But it was a bit of work.
Yeah.
It was a bit of work, but
Okay.
it was successful.
Interesting. That is so interesting, Matt, because you would really want to have done some research
Mhm.
and really have set that up somehow for yourself to make it meaningful and to make it actually a pilgrimage. So there's an element here that we need to make sure is in place as we continue in this
Mhm.
quest to make sure we to find the different ways that one can define a pilgrimage, right?
Yeah.
So there
I,
has to be that element
I
of what
guess
you
the
might
problem.
call the religious experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think for some people, what's good about pilgrimage is you can just dive into it and immerse yourself in it. But you can, for not maybe for everyone, but for a lot of people, you can only do that if there is some semblance of a structure. So if you want to make your own, you need to make that structure first, and
Well,
then you
you
can
have to
lose
structure it.
yourself in it.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly, and decide all those things,
which is a
what
bit like,
stages and
yeah, if you're a Catholic and you go to mass, you know it off by heart. So sometimes you can really concentrate on elements. Other times you just lose yourself in the liturgy,
yeah.
and there is a certain comfort in that, I think.
Well, I think, I think there's a sort of a halfway mark here. How interesting is it to go on? We've talked about this before, Matt. Yes, there are the big pilgrimages, the big three that we talk about. And they had a purpose back, in the midst of time. People were walking them for a reason, generally for the redemption and salvation of their very souls. I guess that was a pretty big deal. Um, but so you can't really invent them. I
Mm.
mean, they already exist. And then we've talked about the ones that we are inventing where there are some sites that are grouped close enough together that are meaningful enough in connection with the life of a saint, for example, like the St. Francis Way, that we're able to create something that seems to have meaning for people. Also, because in the example of St. Francis, he actually lived out most of his life in that part of the world. So you are
Mm.
really walking in the footsteps of someone. So there's that. And then we've the other third thing that we've talked about is all these little pilgrimages that exist
Mhm.
everywhere across Europe and other places, absolutely for sure. North Africa,
Mhm.
the Near East, where there anywhere there are ancient monasteries, there are pilgrimages from villages to churches to sites to martyr sites to like many, many, many. So I'm curious about those.
Well, I think
So
there are
maybe that we'll
loads,
talk
and
about that
I
sometime.
think they can be really helpful. You know, like when I've been feeling down or I've had like some kind of issue, I'll often do a day long one to a smaller site. But there is something else that I want to talk about here before
Interesting.
we kind of
Yes.
wrap up, and I think it's important, and that is that we so if I take, for example, the Kabbalah tradition, so the Kabbalah tradition says that God splintered him or herself into a billion fragments, and those fragments lodged in every person, so that we can, if we look hard enough, find the sacred in anyone and anything. And last year, I had a very interesting but very powerful pilgrimage that I wrote about. And what happened? I have a friend who is in a forced marriage, and she was quite unhappy at the time. And I was thinking about that, and I wanted to make a pilgrimage to kind of get my head around it a bit. And I heard the story of a lady called Banaz Mahmoud. Now, Banaz Mahmoud, she was from Kurdish family, moved to the UK, and the family married her off, and she was very young. And they married her off to some guy who was very abusive, was much older than her. He abused her. He was horrible. And she went to the police. She tried to get out. She went to the police, and they kind of brushed her away. She did leave him, and actually, found love, another guy from her community, and was very happy. But then the family murdered her as an honor killing. And it's a horrific story. It's an horrific story. But it really resonated with me. One, because it's such a powerful story, but also because of what my friend was going through. And also, it's so sad. I thought, is there anything positive you can get out of this? But one of the things was that the family refused to give her a funeral properly, and they refused to mark her grave. But her sister saved some money, and she got a gravestone. She had a sister who got out as well, and the sister, uh, she got this gravestone put there, so the grave is marked. And also, Banaz's example helped her sister liberate herself, and now her sister Paisley, she works to support other victims of honor violence. And so what I did, it's in a vast municipal graveyard in South London. I thought, right, I'm going to go there, and I was working in London, finished early, and so I took the train to this station in the middle of suburbia, and then I walked about a mile to this graveyard, and I found the grave, and I'd gone there just to say a prayer. But then when I got there, it was a bit overgrown. So what I did with my bare hands is I tidied the grave, I cleaned the grave. And I found that so powerful because I never known this girl and I never will, you know? And, maybe I can help
Mm.
people who are victims of that, maybe I can't. But there was something I could do. And at the end of the day, I just found that act more powerful than the prayer. And
Wow, that's so
I found
interesting
that a
because,
powerful pilgrimage. I really
yeah,
did.
well, exactly, Matt. And as you started telling that story, it started for me, as I started listening to it, it started to have the feeling of something that you were talking about as a pilgrimage, actually. And
Mm,
I didn't know what was coming in the story. So that was really wonderful. I completely felt that as something that was going to be like a pilgrimage in some meaningful sense
mm,
for you. It was a great story, Matt.
yeah.
So it can, that tells me it can really come in so many forms. Because I was
Yeah.
going to say, you mentioned about the 1 day pilgrimages and how that can completely make you feel better. Sure, so can a walk in nature. But one of the things that was fitting in our definition of a pilgrimage is that it tends to be understood as a journey that's quite far,
Mm,
over a prolonged period of time and on foot. Now, it doesn't have to be on foot based on people's abilities. I think we all agree on that. And time
mm.
constraints and finances and other, I think we just need to be really respectful about that. Um,
But I think you need to go somewhere. And I also think maybe there needs to be some kind of act of worship or service. And for me, the tidying the grave was a form
Right.
of worship and service.
Bingo.
Like people who, when they clean the feet of, wash the feet and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's a really great story, Matt, and that
Yeah.
you were able to do that and that it meant something
Hmm.
profound to
And
you
I wrote an article about it. It's called A
that
Glimpse
you
of
hadn't
Light.
planned on. That's another thing. We can't plan
Yeah,
to have these experiences. We can't plan the where and the why for and the whom of an experience like that.
that's true.
You can't. You just
Yeah,
have to be there so it can happen
be
to you.
open to the possibility.
Yeah. Is
Okay.
that
I mean, I think that's it, again. It was lovely chatting.
a good place to wrap it up?
Yeah, I think so. But
So
again,
great to
I
talk to
wrote
you,
this
Matt.
article called "A Glimpse of Light," and
Okay.
I'll pop the link. That's about
Put a
the
link in the description.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it tells about it a bit more. But well, you know the story anyway. So I'm just told it. Anyway, that's all from me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Keep
Bye for
traveling.
this week.
Stay
Thanks,
on the path.
everyone. Bye for now.